All right. Hello. We're running a little behind. Life is hectic. I went to Costco the other day and bought a roll, like a big thing of paper towel, and I have no clue where it disappeared to. I probably left it on the side of the car and somebody picked it up. That's what I get. All right. We'll open up this syllabus so we can get into this discussion. On Black Feminist Thought, we're going to be talking over oh, is this loud? It's telling me I'm really loud. We're going to be talking over chapter 11, but not the whole chapter. We're just going to start with the beginning. We're going to break this up. I know, typically this week would be when we're rotating into the next side, but because of the pandemic, the stress, the anxiety, and everyone kind of being slowed down by that, we are just going to take our time. We're going to take our time with this, okay? And give people a chance to kind of dive in and pick it up and, not rush through it or make people feel like this is something they can't take on. Because it's a really good read, and we've purposefully broken it down in order to make it an easy read, which is why we started in the middle of the book instead of the beginning of the book, because it is an academic text. Dag. My desk is also covered in water because the fire alarm went off last night. It was crazy in here, so I gotta clean this up after. Let me do this so that I can have people join. Because now that we're doing it this way, through the new setup, for whatever reason, it doesn't populate at the top of the group, so I have to share it, which is interesting. But let's do that right quick. Cause ain't nobody said nothing. People just lurking. Okay. Let me do this really quick. Okay. Post. Boom. That's done. All right. So we have the. Ooh, why is my syllabus? Hello, Alana. How are you doing? Acrobat Reader is so difficult. Bitch. Okay. Just do it like this. Oh. You know what? I realized I did that. I'm sorry. If you have purchased the syllabus for this book, I did the layout for it this go around, and I didn't realize that I don't when you pull it up in on your devices that you can't do it page by page. It's double page as if you were printing it. That was my graphic design era. Okay. So chapter 11 is Black Feminist Epidemiology, and the reason we started at this chapter is because if you read academic books, it feels like they always want to get to what they're actually talking about, the breakdown of it further into the book. So I don't know why that is. I don't have a spicy take on that. I've been outside of the academy for so long, but I don't necessarily feel like chapter 11 should be chapter 1, but it's you would read, if you read this book in the traditional manner, and because it's meant to be read in the academic setting, so you can pull up all the other writing that's been done. This book was published in 94, so there is all this other writing that's been done. Imani Perry, who I believe teaches at Yale or Princeton or one of those schools, I follow her on Instagram, and she's been tweeting a lot about the fact that she's teaching a class on this book. And I've noticed that she uses a lot of ancillary materials to study the book. And so it's not typically in the academic setting read on its own. And so we're starting at the chapter that best explains the theory. And I thought this chapter was really beneficial. Look, I got my little bookmark. Okay. This chapter is really beneficial because it breaks down the ways in which we as Black women have not had our knowledge validated. And I think there's a lot of ways in which you can take the theory that Dr. Collins breaks down in this chapter and apply it to your everyday life. There's a lot of ways to extrapolate what's being discussed here and pivot towards things that are more personal to you. So she starts out with the Eurocentric knowledge validation process. So that's page 251. Oh, no, I don't know where. Okay, so Morgan has a different copy. So in the syllabus, it says pages 251 to 271. But for me, that's actually starts at page 270. And she says, because elite white men control Western structures of knowledge validation, their interests pervade the themes, paradigms, and epistemologies of traditional scholarship. As a result, U.S. Black women's experiences, as well as those of women of African descent, transnationally have been routinely distorted within or excluded from what counts as knowledge. And I have been thinking about this when I originally read it, because even do I participate in this in how new words get made, right? So being on YouTube and the canon of Black women who do cultural critiques and seeing new terms like texturism and featureism and different things that are applicable to what I would just term as the European spectrum of beauty ideals and how they basically erase Black women from that. But these words make sense. So what would be my, why do I have this negative reaction at first to new words? Why is my knee-jerk reaction to want to claim that somebody is making up something? Because aren't all words made up? Who gets to construct the way we use language and saying this is validated and this is not? And how we've all kind of been trained to say, okay, well, something coming out of Harvard or Yale or Princeton or Stanford is so much more esteemed than something coming out of FAMU. And it's sort of the pervasiveness of white men's control over Western structures. So that's the intro. And Dr. Collins lays out that she wants to investigate the subjugating knowledge of subordinate groups. And in this case, Black women's standpoints and Black feminist thought. Epistemology points to the ways in which power relations shape who is believed and why. All right, let me pull up the actual, quote-unquote definition of epistemology, not to be confused with what's the word we're using a lot now because of the pandemic. They sound similar, right? The study of medicine. But epistemology is the theory of knowledge, especially with regards to its methods, validity, and scope. It's the investigation of what distinguishes justified belief from opinion. So basically it's the validation process to which we output knowledge. And to Dr. Collins' point, she's expressing that Black women and women of African descent at large have largely been removed from even, if we have a different way of procuring our knowledge or coming about our opinions, we've been just completely removed from this structure. Oh, thank you. Epidemiology, okay, right? I only know what epistemology is because I took the MAT last year and it was one of the MAT words. But epidemiology also comes up and I'm just they sound so similar. And I love mispronouncing a word. Okay, I'm good for that. Gotta hide a little bit of fro growing out in the back. But yeah, I think Dr. Collins, and I really appreciate that what I love about this book is that it really gives you a lot of language to discuss the things that you are dealing with, right? To say that I, as a Black woman, nobody hears me, nobody trusts my opinion. Well, now you have this entire theory that breaks down why that is and the ways in which we can both validate our knowledge for ourselves, but also return to our community and be more cognizant of adjusting the validation process of knowledge for the lived experiences of Black women, for the diverse lived experiences of Black women. All right, so Eurocentric knowledge validation processes and U.S. power relations. Oop. So in the syllabus, it was asked, what is meant by Eurocentric knowledge validation process? And in what ways do these processes inform our understanding of Black feminist thought? That's a tough one. Oop, I can add text. Oh, how do I do this? Oh, here we go. I might try and type out the question. I'm gonna open this file in preview because an Acrobat Reader is being a hater and won't let me copy the text so I can put it on the screen. Okay, my computer is running so slow. Open with. Don't be. Okay, it's not letting me. It's not letting me. That was a cute idea. I don't know why my computer want to be so stank today. Okay, here we go. Oh, can you even see that? Okay. Apply effect. No. Oh no, you can't see it. We tried. Okay. There we go. Okay, now you can see that. Boom, look, we have a question. I love this. Okay. Oh, thank you for doing that for me if I do one. Okay, so what is meant by Eurocentric knowledge value? So in this section, Collins breaks down what she means by elite white men. And their knowledge claims must. I'm just going to read the whole verse. I only underlined that their knowledge claims must satisfy political and epistemological criteria of the context in which they reside. But I'm going to read that whole sentence that she introduces this section with. And she says, in the United States, the social institutions that legitimate, you know, reading this shit, you be like, legitimate? Wait, it's legitimate. It means the same, different emphasis. Okay. Legitimate knowledge, as well as the Western or Eurocentric epistemologies that they uphold, constitute two interrelated parts of the dominant knowledge validation process. In general, scholars, publishers, and other experts represent specific interests and credentialing process, and their knowledge claims must satisfy the political and epistemological criteria of the context in which they reside. So she's saying because this enterprise is controlled by elite white men, knowledge validation processes reflect this group's interest. Ooh, oh man, what did I do that now adds like a black background? This is so like, okay, add a white background. Or just make the text white. Okay, so we can all see it. Thank you. So Alana is saying, I think the example in the chapter stating how Black feminist intellectuals in the academic space have to create and getting their work validated at institutions is a good one. Yes, so I actually think she gets a little bit further into that in the lived experiences as criterion. Because, I mean, the overarching theme in the entire chapter is like all the ways in which Black women are left out of the validation process and how it's repudiated over and over and over again, right? So we could take it from scholarship, we could take it from the academy, we can take it in the day-to-day interactions that we have. Yeah. So, okay. I'm going to ask this now. No. I don't know if you can see this, okay, it keeps changing. Every time I add a question. What danger is presented when elite white men or other overly homogenous groups in charge of the knowledge are in charge of the knowledge validation process? Well, to Dr. Collins' point, Black women will be continually denied. Will be denied positions of authority. Oh, it is in this chapter. Okay, in this section. And then it creates negative, I mean, this is where we get stereotypes from. This is where we get negative imagery from. This is where we get like all this harmful rhetoric that, you know, does a disservice, right? It's where we get the welfare queen concept from. Yes, Black women will be silenced. The validation process is what she explains when she talks about positive methodology. Distance from subject, absence of emotion, ethics and values are inappropriate, and adversarial debate. I think that is a really, yes. Because what happens is, and she makes the case about breaking down how scientists will constantly want to say, oh, well, we've removed all emotion from this. Our data is correct because we don't have any bias or attachment to this, right? And we have enough distance from the subject, but then your distance from the subject becomes absolute. Right? And this is what she's also talking about in the absence of emotions. And then, again, as Fadumo says, ethics and values are inappropriate. And then there's no room for constructive debate. There's no room, you completely silence the other side because you just say, oh, well, you're biased or you're basing this too much on your lived experience. Because we set these really rigid standards and really binary standards around the way knowledge can be validated. Oop, did I just lose my page? Okay. Let me clue y'all in a little bit more here. Oh, I don't know why I can't add Danae's comments. Dag. Danae says Black feminist thought could only be accepted if white men have accepted them. I think, you know, per Dr. Collins putting out this work, I think we've gotten a little bit more away from that. And she does this isn't necessarily a book where she's just breaking down what the issue is. She does address what the plausible solutions will be. This is really weird. Why can't I? Okay, I just had to make it bigger. But with regards to the Eurocentric white male validation process, Denisha is saying, for me it means that people creating subjugated knowledge often have to start from a place of critiquing canonical texts from white male philosophers or academics like Marx before you can even dive into constructing your own theory. And isn't that interesting, right? Like, that we have to, like, we're required... Bitch, what the hell happened? Damn. That's a mess. I'm sorry, I have a candle on my desk and like the glass blew up. But you know, like, okay, I applied for my PhD. I did not get in, but I had a call this week with a professor that heads up another program. He was like reading over my application. He's like, there's nothing wrong with your application. He's like, you just want to study Black women and it's politics. Like, it's very frustrating to know that I put in a really strong application. But because I don't want to study Eastern European or I don't want to study, you know, the Cold War or like Germany, that it's refrained that modern Black American history should be social studies, and there's not enough material to study it through a history program, right? Or that, you know, we should know you're considered unfettered or uneducated if you don't know who Shakespeare is. Right? But it's entirely plausible for someone to have never read a Toni Morrison book, right? Like, you can't, and even when I like went to Howard University, like I transferred to Howard, I left Howard because I realized I didn't have the access or privilege to live in a world where everything was Black. That if I felt like if I had stayed there, and this probably wasn't I'm not saying I was right in this, but at 19, I thought if I stay here, I'm going to get so used and so comfortable with dealing with Black folks, I'm not going to know how to deal with the whites, and they control everything. right? Like, it's crazy. And then there's, when it comes to like even like communism, okay, like there's Marx and Engels, right? And they're the foundations, but so much of what happened in like during the African decolonization period, right? And communism doesn't really give consideration to race. And so again, you end up, before you can go and read like who's the dude that was is it Thomas Sankara? Out of Burkina Faso, right? Like before you can go read Nkrumah or Sankara or Lumumba, right? You're supposed to be super well. You can't quote them without also having knowledge of the white people, right? And it's a frustrating process, right? Because it doubles the work. It puts so much work before us before we can even say, "Hey, my history is valid. The history that's particular to my people and my ancestors is valid, and it doesn't necessarily have to be done through the lens of a Eurocentric white male or Western world concept." And so I appreciate Dr. Collins for making that make sense and to give us all this language that we can pull from the book. And again, if you want to get smart with your white male boss, because, the time might come, you can hit them with some complex syntax, thanks to Dr. Collins. This definitely reminded me of the time a group of white dudes try to establish a journal on Somali studies. And there's a bunch of articles coming out titled, Can the Somali Talk? This chapter gave such context to that. And this chapter also reminds me to write, sometimes I too need to mind my business, right? Like, we can't speak, just because I'm black does not mean I can speak to every black experience. And where was I having this conversation? I guess I was talking when I did the IG live with I always want to pronounce her name wrong. I never pronounce people's names. It just be in my head. I'd be second guessing myself. Agosoa, and she was saying about like we were talking about Daniel Kaluuya playing Fred Hampton, and we were talking about like, does lived experience account for anything, like particular to acting? And I just think, I do have a diverse audience. A lot of my audience is of the diaspora, and I can't always, I don't have the right to come in and, talk about being Muslim, right? Like, I can host the conversation and I can bring in the authoritative voices on that topic because these are people that have lived that experience, but I can't speak to that because that's not my experience and I don't have an intimate connection to that. But these white folks will always feel like they have a right to suggest that their scholarship on this is more pertinent than the scholarship of the people from the community. And they do this by both erasing our voices from the validation process of knowledge, but also from keeping us out of the academies. People haven't read Toni Morrison, but they, white men reading first edition books, look at you sideways if you haven't read Hemingway. I don't think have I read Hemingway? I read that nigga that was in the forest. That wasn't the nigga in the forest. That wasn't the, whatchamacallit citizen nigga, was it? No. Emerson, that's Emerson. This is why it takes so long to get to the point in academic text. Citationally is necessary, but sometimes I think we're just trying to prove rigor. Ooh, girl. Yeah, let me actually, I have not completed reading this book. I'm reading with y'all, okay? This is one where I'm reading with you guys. I'm trying to get to my preface to the second edition. Where is my, do I not have a table of contents? Well, yeah, I guess that's why the book is broken down the way it is. And you have to give all this historical precedent from the lens of the Western world before you can say, okay, so this is why my theory needs to be taken seriously, and this is how you've erased my theory that I've just completely laid out for you. Yes, I follow them on Instagram. Yes. Okay. Let us move along. Okay. So some of the takeaway points are, oh, the paging, the page notation is so different from mine. All right, I'm just going to put this quote on the screen because I don't know where actually in the book this is. But I think this is a really good quote. Tag. Let me see if y'all can see. This is a lot of text. Okay. So moreover, specialized thought challenging notions of Black female inferior. I can read. I can definitely read. Moreover, specialized thought challenging notions of Black female inferiority is unlikely to be generated from within white male-controlled academic settings because both the kinds of questions asked and the answers to them would necessarily reflect a basic lack of familiarity with Black women realities. And I really appreciate this chapter because I started reading this book right after I got my rejection letter. And, I put in this application saying I wanted to research African American, Black American women post 1950s, low income, working class Black women in public housing and their activism around housing, labor, and education. Because the civil rights movement and the freedom struggle, when they pivoted to like SNCC and college students, that's when the respectability politics resurged and low income and working class Black women were erased from the movement. And so there is a decent amount of scholarship, quite a bit written by white women, but there's not a lot of scholarship around this area. And this is why we constantly see this refrain about single Black mothers are the downfall of the Black family. They're not. Or when we see the various like anti-poor people rhetoric, or the way, this messaging about Black women having historically bad taste in who they pick to partner with. And as if somehow Black women are to be blamed for the lack of achievement and the lack of upliftment that the Black community has been able to attain is somehow put on the backs of Black women, right? And I think a lot of that is because people aren't asking these questions about this, like the scholar in the academy, these questions aren't being asked. And you can't, again, as Dr. Collins points out in this quote, you can't expect that in a male-controlled academic setting that these kind of questions were going to get a leg up. So when I went to meet with the professor who I want to work under, Dr. Williams, she flat out told me, she's like, there are going to be people that are against you doing this. And it's just like, oh, well, damn. Okay. Next takeaway point. All this text. Oh, this is heavy. Western or Eurocentric social and political thought contains three interrelated approaches to ascertaining truth that are routinely portrayed as competing epistemologies. The first, reflected in positive science, has long claimed that absolute truths exist and that the task of scholarship is to develop objective, unbiased tools of science to measure these truths. But many social theories have challenged the concepts and epistemology of this version of science as representing the vested interest of elite white men and therefore as being less valid when applied to experiences of other groups and more recently to white male recounting of their own exploits. And this is how, in high school, I was taught that slavery was a necessary evil. This is why you get people coming out of school talking about, well, the slaves were fed and housed and clothed, so it wasn't such a bad life. Oh, okay. Well, color me surprised. Okay, this quote is on page, in this copy of the book, it's on page 274. And she follows this particular quote up, which is, I think, what Denisha is talking about here, when she says, such criteria ask African, it's okay, y'all can like this, y'all can heart it up, show a bitch she doing a little something here, thank you. But such criteria ask African American women to objectify ourselves. Yes. And this is why it doesn't necessarily simply mean that because a black woman gets access to these elite institutions that she is going to turn around and still be and stand for the community. On my little app, the hearts like burst on my screen. This is making me very happy. Thank you. I love y'all. And further down on page 274, she says, this is like I think this section of the book is so thorough. And again, I just keep saying it speaks to so many. Okay, so the numbering is correct. I think the numbering is correct for if you are on the PDF version. Okay, so I don't have the 10th anniversary edition. The Page Nation in the syllabus is for the PDF version, which we did send out in the newsletter that people aren't opening. It's okay. People don't read the newsletter. Y'all don't like me. And we did post in the group. There's a link somewhere in this group for the PDF, so you didn't have to buy the book because we realized, it's going to be harder to get books with the pandemic happening. But further down on the page, this is it's easier to count back from the next section. This is the second to last paragraph where she says, on the other hand, many black women have had access to another epistemology that encompasses standards for assessing truth that are widely accepted among African American women. An experiential material base underlies a black feminist epistemology, namely collective experiences and accompanying worldviews that U.S. black women sustained based on our particular history. And I wrote in the margins, how do we set the standard for shared experiences? Because, what book was I reading? By Bell Hooks, where she was talking about how black women we can still participate in keeping other black women out because we don't believe that they have the same shared experience as us. I'm happy the PDF was helpful because sometimes we try to put this stuff in the newsletter because everyone's not on Facebook, and then we put it on Facebook, but I keep thinking people aren't checking the Facebook group. I see the analytics and it tells us that we do have most of our group members are active. People just aren't commenting or engaging in the group, so I'm just I'm gonna let people who had a space because y'all low-key lurking. It's okay. All right, so let's move into the next section, which is lived experience as a criterion of meaning. So, in the first paragraph, Dr. Collins says, living life as black women requires wisdom because knowledge about the dynamics of intersecting oppressions has been essential to U.S. black women's survival. And I thought that was such an interesting way to distinguish wisdom from knowledge, and how even if you want to keep us out of, and it's how we look at our ancestors and our grandmothers, right? That somehow, particular to the ability for black folks to survive to old age, imbues them with inherent wisdom. We might not say they're knowledgeable. Ginger ale don't fix everything. We will say they are wise. There is a gnat in my apartment. What's this? Let me try this. So if I go to B.O, but add a space between the K, that's really funky. That's an actual website where I can get books for free at? Is this what you're saying? Well, thank you for putting this on. No, it wasn't all about love. It's black faces. I quoted it I didn't quote it. I used it because I was doing the video that I did on Lizzo back in January. I was reading parts of that book to reference, which I don't know. Did I reference? Because that's an Audible sponsored video, and the book I read is not on Audible, so I don't think I could mention it. But a good bit of what I was talking about was based off of Bell Hooks' writing, and I think I meant to post it somewhere and just never got around to it. Sorry, we be overwhelmed. Mm, 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 mm. In describing differences separating African American and white women, Nancy White evokes a similar rule. When you come right down to it, white women just think they are free. Black women know they ain't free. The shade, the tea. Knowledge without wisdom is adequate for the powerful, but wisdom is essential to the survival of the subordinate. Yes, this was the book I read. Black Faces, White Spaces. I don't remember if I mentioned it in the video or not, but a good bit of, because I like outline all my videos. And so I pulled from that book extensively. Whew. I do think this book reads really well with eloquent rage. This chapter in particular is a great companion to eloquent rage. So this part of the book made me think of Dr. Cooper's book when she was talking about how some guys will tell her she's book smart, but they got street knowledge. Or when people will be questioning her because she's in the academia. Now I kind of feel sad knowing that there's a struggle in I'm just going to say academy. There's too many syllables, sorry. As a black woman, and then in the community who might feel she's no longer participating in or understanding their lived experience. I mean, and don't we see this again and again and again, right? Where we do, and I think for me, this book and the way that Dr. Collins breaks it down helps me to be more understanding of some of the slander that someone like myself or like Blue Check Twitter or someone like Dr. Cooper or any of us who have had the privileged access to the academy, who have had the ability to study and have these sort of dialogical educations that are largely kept away from the black community, and who therefore talk and speak a certain way, how we might get pushed back from, for lack of a better word, the hood, right? And people might be, oh, like, you talk funny, or I don't like the way you talk, or I don't like how you do things. And understanding that these people are just trying to hold on to the little bit of validation they get in having wisdom, right? Or having wisdom that's acknowledged within the community, right? So we understand that, I can't go to Harvard and learn how to be street smart, right? You know what I mean? Like, we always talk about being book smart, but not having no common sense. And so, there's a lot of pride in, well, if this is the only avenue that I have to procure any sort of livelihood, is to hustle, is to do things in the streets, be of the streets, right? Then I'm going to hold on to that. And if you can use your privilege and access to distinguish yourself from me, then I should be able to use my wisdom that's been validated by part of my community to distinguish myself from you. But yeah, also, as Denisha is saying, Fadumo's quote relates to the discussion of exceptionalism that Dr. Cooper was also talking about, right? And just being cognizant that there are all these small checks of privilege that get us into these spaces, and that the spaces that we inhabit oftentimes as black women were not meant for every black woman to get into. And there are a lot of structures that have kept others out. And so it's a privilege that we got in, but what do you do with that privilege? And which is why you find a lot of black professors who often have, unlike their white peers who can go to the academy and just teach the classes and get their tenure, most black professors will be running community service programs. They'll be doing things for like the student union and for the workers union and the people in the cafeteria who are oftentimes black folk, and doing things for the community, right? Like, unlike, how many of your white male professors have community outreach programs that they're also running while teaching classes. It's a lot. Okay. I think someone's asking about if you have a link to where she discusses this about being the outsider within. You know what? Again, Dr. Imani Perry on Twitter has been tweeting through a lot of the um, ancillary materials that she's using to study, to teach this book for her entire semester. And I unfortunately do not have academic. Again, you know what I mean? Like I'm gonna be more mindful of just going ahead and posting in the group, because plenty of people in the group and in my syllabi cohort still have logins to, or are currently in school, or still have logins that give them access to like Project Muse and JSTOR, and where all this like academic material is held up in, which is how we were able to get the PDF link. But I'll pull some of, oh, maybe I'll assign it to someone else. I'm kind of overloaded. We are like so behind on work right now. But getting a bunch of pulling a bunch of the materials that Dr. Perry has tweeted about, and we'll just put them all in a PDF, right? We'll link to all of them in a PDF and then send it out in the newsletter. Okay, so Denisha's saying it's an essay. We'll look this up. I'll make a notation of this. Learning from the outsider within, the sociological significance of Black feminist thought. Yes. I will. Yeah, maybe we can like share, because there's a way to share files in the group on Facebook. So, I mean, I don't, like, when I ask for stuff, I'm not trying to be stingy. Like, it's open for the whole group, but typically I'm just asking for stuff because we're planning stuff out for the future. I mean, this is also why we got Cynthia Erivo's Harriet movie and the way it went, because there's a lot of scholarship on Black people, not by Black people. Thank you, Camille. That is accurate. Okay, well, thank you, Jacqueline. I'll keep that in mind. I'm just gonna post it in the group, and if you see the post, it works. We'll start like a file, and so people can have access to the stuff. All right. I'm sorry. I'm deviating, and we don't have much time left. Okay. Oh, you know what Denisha's saying? Check the index. That is true. So in the back, you see in the back of the book, you can look up the phrases. Oh, this is the references she used. Oh, does she? I don't think she does. She have? Oh, she has a definition. There's a glossary in the back with all the words. She doesn't necessarily have. Oh, no, she does have an index. So there's an index all the way in the back. Oh, sorry, my camera's here. And so you can look up certain phrases, and it'll point to where she discusses it in the book. We are next cycle going to be reading chapters 1 and 2. We'll probably roll those out a little bit further into May, since we're a little behind right now. And a lot of the syllabi cohort members have been impacted by COVID. So I don't know if we're going to read more of the book, though. If there are certain chapters, if you've read this book before, and there's, aside from 11 and 12 and 1 and 2, and there's particular chapters that you think would be poignant to discuss, let me know, and we can do them. Okay, for anyone who wants to take notes for the outsider within status, is how you can look it up in the index, and here's the pages. But if you just look this up in the index, it'll point you to all the pages where she discusses the essay. And we'll pull up the PDF and post it at some point in the group. African American women's lives remain structured at the convergence of several factors. Black community organizations reflecting principles of African influence belief systems, activist mothering traditions that stimulate politicized understandings of Black women's mother work, and a social class system that relegates Black women as workers to the bottom of the social hierarchy. That was a real, tough quote. Okay, yes, we have the quote in the syllabus here. And then the further quote after that is, wish I could make it bigger. Okay, it's really not allowing me to make it bigger, but here we go. In traditional African American communities, Black women find considerable institutional support for valuing lived experience. Black women's centrality in families, churches, and other community organizations allow us to share with younger, less experienced sisters our concrete knowledge of what it takes to be a self-defined Black woman. I actually think that this quote in particular opens up room for a critique on the theories and methodologies that Dr. Collins is presenting in this book. Because to me, this is like, all right, well, what about respectability politics? What about the varied lived experience of Black women? What about queer Black women? What about non-binary Black women? What about all these various experiences that because of respectability politics and because there are so few, and there have been historically, so few safe spaces for Black folks, which means, like, you know, you think about it up until the 1960s and 70s, where were Black folks working at? You know, like really to the late 70s, early 80s, where were Black people in mass getting jobs at in America? And the Black church was one of the only few safe spaces, and the church has upheld some of the most constricting policy, right, that harms a lot of people that don't fit into this very binary understanding of what it means to be a respectable person. If you watch the Clark sisters, the biopic on Lifetime, you know, imagine if Dr. Maddie Moss was the one helping you to define yourself as a Black woman. We all see how Twinkie turned out, okay? No shade, no tea. But, you know, historically, the spaces that we have been able to live in have not been very kind to Black women holding a diverse identity or non-binary identity of themselves, right? Even this idea of, like having children or marrying or partnering has been volatile for Black women. But even when in these spaces we found a way to liberate ourselves within that community, or she is leaving out the club, or she is leaving out the club. You know, I think yeah, we have found spaces or found a way to liberate ourselves within these communities that are really restrictive. But then we also have to acknowledge that, you know, finding ourselves or liberating ourselves takes absorbing a high level of trauma, right? Liberation, I mean, when we talk about liberation, it's like we can look back and be thankful of the ways in which people have fought for the liberation of our community, but we also have to acknowledge that the process of liberation is a very violent process. Towards liberation is violent. It's very violent. And so, you know, I would love to have this benevolent approach about Black women and saying that, like, I can look back at all Black women and know that, you know, they can help me define myself as a Black woman, but I've also lived through that experience. I'm in a whole sorority, and I know how harmful that can be. Okay? Don't say no shame. All right. Let's see. We're going to delve into the... yeah, we can do this next section, and then we'll chop it here. And then we'll do another chat for the end of chapter 11 next week. But moving into the use of dialogue and assessing knowledge claims. This session focuses on the role of dialogue in language, which is what the book club is all about, in knowledge production and understanding. Collins surveys the use of call and response, African-based oral traditions, and other forms of communication to assert her claim that Black women intellectuals invoke their relationships and connectedness by way of dialogue. The opening quote is, "Dialogue implies talk between two subjects, not the speech of subject and object. It is a humanizing speech, one that challenges and resists domination." And that's a quote that she pulls from Bell Hooks herself. For Black women, new knowledge claims are rarely worked out in isolation from other individuals and are usually developed through dialogues with other members of community. A primary epistemological assumption underlying the use of dialogue in assessing knowledge claims is that connectedness rather than separation is an essential component of the knowledge validation process. I do think Collins excuse me, does kind of heavily rely on the idea that community is really strong for every Black woman. And I would be cautious of that thought. But per the syllabus, what is the benefit of Black women using dialogue to assess knowledge claims? Right, make this shit a little bit bigger. To answer this question, I think dialogue is important, and this is like a theory that Paulo Freire breaks down in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, right? He makes this argument for a dialogical education that says you are pulling intelligence out of people rather than trying to insert the knowledge that you feel they should hold into them, right? Then you meet the community where they are, and you understand that their lived experience will be different from yours, and therefore the education that they need and the sort of dialogical education they need will be different from maybe the education that you took part in. And I think it's important because on some levels, yeah, we do have a different lived experience. Therefore, we are going to ask different questions. Different sorts of knowledge are going to be important to us. And that's why I think it's beneficial. Okay, so y'all are adding some comments. So Alana is saying that this section made her think about a book she read that said that Black Twitter was a form of call and response. I was a little skeptical about that. Any thoughts? What book was this? I don't know. I think, isn't all of Twitter call and response? I think a good bit of Twitter is reactive. I think in the way that social currency works and outrage machines work, there is a lot of call and response that happens, but I don't know. I'd be interested in hearing from other folks what they have to say about this. This was an interesting section as she separates dialogue, feminine, community-based, finding a voice, and adversarial debate, masculine, debate form without, and visual metaphors. I'm always kind of like hesitant when people use masculine and feminine to disseminate a theory and to, the stereotypes we fall into when we say, okay, well, feminine has to be understanding and nurturing, and masculine is inherently, like, aggressive and warmongering, right? And I know that there has been a good bit of work that has come out that has, respectfully critiqued some of the heteronormative language and theory that Dr. Collins puts forward in this book. Our language is a system constructed by people constantly needing to insist that we exist. Call and response is reactive and active engagement. Yeah, I think this is kind of where I get hung up on, like, Black Twitter really wholly being call and response. I do think per the quote that Dr. Collins pulls from June Jordan on the analysis of Black English, and there's a professor, Dr. Green. Oh man, the podcast that I was working on for a really long time, and we're now pivoting. We're still going to get this done. I wanted to interview Dr. Lisa Green, who's at UMass Amherst, and she's done a lot of work around the etymology of Black American English. And again, you sort of the validation process that, whatever you want to call it, however you want to define the language that is particular to the Black community, that it is a valid language and that it has a valid syntax and a I'm like losing my words here, that Black American English has a valid syntax to it, and that it is a validated language form that has a knowledge process behind it, right? And I think this quote from June Jordan is really helpful to remind us that our language is a system structured by people constantly needing to insist that we exist. This is the book that Alana was talking about, Reclaiming Our Space, How Black Feminists Are Changing the World from Tweets to the Streets. Okay, I'm going to have to look that up. Thank you. Yeah, and I think it's, the way that we've used language to, even like, okay, we could say on the one end, intersectionality has been a very helpful word, coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, right? It's not a very helpful word, but you know what I'm saying? Like, we have this syntax from the streets that does help address points quickly and get together the ways in which we try to imply a meaning to things, like even like the advent of Hotep as would that be considered a noun? Yeah. And then we get like misogynoir, or intersectionality, or even black feminism or womanism, and all these terms that really help us to concisely get to the point, and also discuss things that are unique to our experience. Jaslyn is saying, from clapping back, retweets, and comments, and the vernacular chosen to engage that the community understands is a cipher. I guess, but is it? Because sometimes I think people do. I guess that would be the call, right? That people get on, and I appreciate that there are people in Black Twitter who always have their foot on someone's neck. I don't participate in that, but I think that the ways in which Black Twitter that I follow, on the side that I am on, constantly challenges my way of thinking. I have always been appreciated. This is a judgment-free zone. Who am I to say that all our book choices are great on this book club? Sometimes I was a little bit worried when I started this, like, oh man, because I actually, Well-Read Black Girl is started by Gloria. Gloria and I were like really good friends when I lived in New York. We still cool. We just obviously lost touch because I don't live in New York anymore. But I'm like, oh man, they're always like reading like super current new books, and I kind of want to go back and like read stuff that's already been out, because like, how are you reading it? I don't want to just tell people to go read a book, and I want to read it as a community because it gives you a whole new lens. So like, are people going to look at this book club and be like, oh, they're just reading shit I've already read, I don't want to do that now? No judgment, because I'm sure someone's looking like, oh, they just read old shit, they ain't reading nothing new. Okay. The takeaway points from this chapter, we're going to close out here, because I have some video I still need to get done. Oh, sorry, this is so small. Women tend to ground their epistemological premises in metaphors, suggesting finding a voice, speaking, and listening. And I think this goes back to an earlier point Faduma made about this one. Yes. Right? And I actually think that this is a point of critique, right? This is a point where we can challenge this narrative that somehow women inherently are, even in our process of knowledge validation, or that we can't be adversarial, that we aren't aggressive, that we aren't toxic people ourselves. Not, I'm not, but because white women exist, okay? Imagine me being a professor. I would be a whole ham. And the last takeaway point that's addressed in the syllabus is around language. Language is particularly important as Black women routinely utilize these knowledges in their knowledge production processes. Do you agree? Karens don't want no smoke. Word to Dr. Cooper, but they do be carrying. I thought it was interesting the point that was made where she quotes Gail Jones again, in that there is always this consciousness as that apparently in the oral tradition of storytelling within the African diaspora, that there is always this consciousness and importantness of the hearer. And I think that's often common for a lot of subjugated groups. Like there's this TikTok trend among like the Samoan Pacific Islander crew where this like it's a song. I want to say it might be Polynesian girl. I don't be knowing. It's like Coco and everyone keeps doing it, right? But like a few of the people have translated the song, and it's actually just a song talking about someone they were growing like coconut and banana. And then they got robbed and they went to go get their guns, but they had no bullets because they used all their money to drink beer. But, thinking about the ways in which you share a message that really relate to the community in which you come from, and being able to inspire like a critical dialogue isn't always done in the ways in which we think, academic text, right? Particularly to our community. So when you come from a Black community that has largely been kept out of the academy, how do you give them access to the theories that surround their community, which is what Dr. Cooper discussed in the author chat we did, where she was like, she acknowledged that for the past 30 years or so, a lot of Black feminist theory and work particular to the Black community research has been caught up in the academy, and it's not made accessible to a broader audience. So that's what we try to do in the book club, right? Provide this political, historical education, but in a way that speaks to the everyday person. So I don't need to come over here. Obviously I get on here and I'm having problems with the language. I can't even pronounce all the words. We're all kind of participating in this experience of learning together, because if we've been largely kept out, we have to use our own validation process that is way more expansive and not feed into this Eurocentric Western white male idea of how epistemology is supposed to work, and how not only do we validate knowledge, but how do we parse out that knowledge and wisdom. It's like, how crazy is it that you get to do all this research on the Black community and say, oh, this is what would be helpful, and this is all the data points, but like you don't make those data points accessible to the same people who you are researching. It's crazy, right? It's crazy. All right. Thank y'all for joining this chat. If you don't already, grab your syllabus for this book. We're going to come back next week. We're going to finish the other half of chapter 11. I know some people have read ahead, but we want to be mindful that everyone reads at a different speed. It is a rough season. I'm personally dealing with a lot of anxiety, and I'm not poor yet. I have not lost a job or necessarily lost opportunity from what's happening. So I can't imagine people that are, more directly impacted from what's going on, what they're dealing with. So we just want to be mindful to be inclusive of everyone and really welcome everyone, because it was suggested that I change the name of the critical theory track, but it's like, I want you guys to understand that it is like a higher level of reading, but it's like accessible to everyone. Like you don't have to have a college education to read these books. We're purposefully breaking them down in a way that is supposed to be accessible to everybody. So even if the last book you read was Shoot It Again, you can come read chapter 11 of Black Feminist Thought. Okay? I'm not really having nightmares. I have really bad anxiety though. The fire alarm went off in my apartment yesterday and it ruined my whole day. It was like, ain't no fire happened. The fire alarm just went off in my apartment and I was so rattled by it. I couldn't come back from it. And I lost the whole workday because of it. And it's just like going out of the house causes anxiety. Going to the store. It's like, how did I go buy a whole roll of paper towel? Like a big thing from Costco. I don't know what I did with it. It's gone. And that's because my mind's going with it. Okay? It's gone with it. But everyone have a good night. You are all... Yeah, I need to stay off Twitter. I need to stay off social media before I go to bed, because... We all do this hoping for a break. Like, you're looking for the good news and some we're just in a cycle where there's no clarity and there's no information, like factual information, because, the donkey in the White House. But girl, It's hard. It's hard for all of us. All right. Good night, y'all. Have a good night.